Pilot Boys in the building. Welcome to the Pilot Boys podcast, where you'll get the real on all things sports, music, and pop culture. I am Mecca Don here with my co-host V.
Mama mentality for life.
Today is May 28th, 2020. Thank you guys for tuning in. I know you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. We are still socially distanced due to this coronavirus. But hopefully, we'll be out of this thing soon. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to bring you a show at all costs. Today is a pretty heavy show. We have a lot of stuff to talk about in news and notes. We talk about New York and New Jersey's professional teams, University of Michigan potentially not playing football versus battles, the NFL changes in the Rooney Rule, George Floyd and Amy Cooper, and so much more. Shout out to our Patreon subscribers. Remember now that our Patreon subscribers will get our episodes on Wednesdays a night early. If you want to donate, you can log on to www.patreon.com/Pilot Boys Podcast. And don't forget to grab some Pilot Boys wristbands at shop.pilotboys.com. Let's go.
Where the Pilot Boys at? Pilot Boys, we get on up. We don't fly, boys, we get up. So high. Pilot Boys, we get on up. We don't fly.
You're listening to the Pilot Boys Podcast, episode 30. We got a lot of news and notes, man. So much that we didn't even think we should have a guest today. We got a lot to talk about, man. You ready to jump into it?
Let's get it.
All right, so let's start. Man, it's almost impossible to have a conversation nowadays, really about anything without it relating to the coronavirus. But the coronavirus and all the things surrounding it really are dictating a lot of our different things in life. For example, what's happening with sports. So the first thing is New York and New Jersey, their professional teams have allowed they're allowing the professional teams to have training camps effective immediately. I think that's significant because New York and New Jersey, or two of the states, New York obviously number one, and New Jersey is probably in the top 5 of states that were hit the hardest by this. So the fact that they are willing to do that now is a good sign, if you know, about the virus specifically, because they've been more restrictive, and then also about sports returning.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed and trusting that they know more than we do, and that they're exercising caution. And I think, again, if New York and Jersey open up, this is kind of the issue, right? Is that teams are in different states, they're in different cities, and if New York and New Jersey open up, but let's say Massachusetts doesn't open up, right? What does that mean then in terms of how the NFL is going to handle this if certain states are saying, hey, we don't feel like it's safe enough for these actions or activities and others do? How is that going to impact the competitive balance of the NFL? It's a tricky situation for them, right?
Well, yeah, it is actually. And that's actually a kind of a great segue to kind of what's happening in college, right? Because the NCAA essentially came out and said that college football and basketball can start having voluntary, quote unquote, workouts as of June 1st. And then you have, you know, a lot of guys are going to be reporting back to campuses and doing these voluntary workouts. But then in Michigan, the governor in Michigan, or the executives in Michigan have basically said, no, you can't come back that early. And so now there are even questions about whether or not Michigan and Michigan State, but particularly Michigan, is even going to have a football season. And it doesn't, I don't know, right now it doesn't seem good.
Well, I mean, maybe if they take a break for a year and don't play, they'll come back 2 years from now and maybe be somewhat competitive in college football again. So right. It's not a big loss for us. I'm kidding, of course, but it is significant, right? How does that impact the rest of the Big Ten if some of the schools are saying we're going to play and some aren't? Like, right. There are a lot of things that need to be worked out here to make it work.
And the other thing too that I think people haven't really talked about yet is it's not necessarily like what the laws of that state are always. That you also have to consider what are the health risks in your area. So, for example, if a team is traveling to Columbus and Columbus is open, and let's say they have 50% or 75% capacity, but the school that's coming to play Ohio has different thoughts on how they want to deal with the coronavirus. How does that work? Obviously, if you're in that state, you have to live kind of by those jurisdictions and those rules, but it's kind of bigger than that. So I think there are a lot of issues here. Michigan potentially not playing, I think, is a very real thing. I don't know what data they're looking at. I don't know what they're going to use to make their decision. But as it sounds right now, it sounds like a very real thing. And I think it just highlights, like what you said earlier, a lot of the potential issues of trying to come back, because there are a lot of other things you have to take into consideration beyond just what's happening in your city.
Specifically at the NCAA level, right? Because we're not like the professional leagues. You're talking about approximately 30 teams, much easier to manage. But when you're talking about college athletics, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of universities and competitions and leagues. So it's definitely
quote unquote amateurs, right?
Yes.
Yes. So those are different issues as well. And then, the thing I've been meaning to say was that Michigan's president essentially said, if they don't have students on campus, all students in full semester, like fully live on campus, then they're not going to have a season, essentially. That very rarely do I have nice things to say about that school up north, but I do respect how he's handling this situation, saying, look, there's no difference between us as athletes. If it's not safe for our students to be on campus, we're not going to put our student athletes at a different risk than we would put our regular students, specifically because they're amateurs, right? Yeah, but the reality is that a lot of these things are ultimately going to be political and economics, because you can't just not have, especially if other people are playing, right? But if you don't play and everybody else is playing, you potentially put your program and the money that flows into that school at risk for decades. Literally, that could set you back for decades. The decommits, that's like almost like a death equivalent of a death sentence for your program. Now, that doesn't mean that what he's doing is not, what you said, is not necessarily noble or not even necessarily the right thing. Sometimes there are things that are more important than that. So, but they better make sure that they feel like the risk that they're evaluating is justified before they make a decision like that, because there are tons of consequences.
Yeah, it's essentially where we stand as a country in a nutshell, right? It's this delicate balance between what's important in a capitalist system, which is that the economy runs and people are able to generate revenue, whether that's academic institutions or small businesses, versus the potential risk from a health standpoint and caring for your citizens and making sure people don't die. So you're right. This thing is gonna, the other thing that I think, last thing on this that I think people have to be ready for is that these things can change by the week, right? Yeah. I think the data is getting analyzed differently. New findings are being put forth. How it's affecting your neighborhood, how it's spreading, what capacity you have for testing, any advancements on treatment. All of those things can change this thing. And the interesting thing is that even if a season happens, that season can be interrupted, or that season, can have changes within the season. We can start off saying, look, we can only have 20%, and then by week 5, they're like, okay, you can have 50% capacity, or you know what I mean, or the other way. So yeah, I think people, sports fans in particular, have to just kind of be ready for whatever. You can be upset, and I know you're going to be upset, but there are a lot of challenges to this thing beyond. Yeah. And I think having fans at stadiums should be far down the list of priorities.
Absolutely.
I understand having the sports, but there's really no real reason why stadiums should be filled with 100,000 people.
Speaking of that, I have a funny question for you that I didn't even prepare you for, but I saw like a soccer game, I think it was, where they had the pumped in crowd noise, and they had very, very tight angles, so you couldn't really see the stands, and it sounded normal. How would you feel about something like that? Some people were like mad about it, like, that's bullshit. I don't want to hear artificial noise if the fans aren't allowed in the stadium. I was surprised to see people saying that, but I
think the fan experience only matters to the fans who are in the stands, right? Like when you're watching at home, how often? guys are probably checking out some of the girls in the stands and the cheerleaders and stuff like that. But how often are you paying attention to the fans? Right?
Well,
You're trying to
you
watch
ever see
the
that
game.
NFL game they did back in the day as an experiment, I think, where they did it with no commentators? It's like the worst thing that you've ever seen in your life. Literally, you can't. It's unwatchable. You can't watch it, and they'll never do it again. And I think just to give people the feel, right? Like if I'm watching a soccer game, part of the soccer game, literally for me,
is the noise. Right?
Oh my God! Of course, the noise.
I mean, I completely agree in terms of creating an atmosphere. It's important, right? But I'm saying, I guess let me walk back what I said. I like the idea of noise and artificial crowd noise, right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying what I was saying is I don't think any of us are really going to who watch on TV are going to lose out on the experience if there aren't fans in the stands.
No, I agree. I think the fan and truthfully, if there aren't fans in the stands, we won't even notice because all the shots will be really, really tight anyway, for the most part. So it's not even. I mean, maybe they'll put up. You'll see a little bit, but they're not gonna be scanning the stadium. But speaking of kind of the coronavirus and how it's affecting these leagues, Damian Lillard came out with some comments that I thought were a little surprising, right? Considering who I think he is as a person, who I think he is as a competitor. And essentially he said that if the NBA returns in July and the Portland Trailblazers don't have a quote unquote meaningful opportunity to get into the playoffs, then he's not going to play. And I have a more specific quote from him, more specific words from him, where he essentially said that if they do a playoff or some type of situation that allows the 7th through 12 seeds to have an opportunity, then it's worth it. But if he's just going to go back and play games when they don't have a meaningful chance to get to the playoffs, then he's not risking whatever for that. But then he said, but I'll still practice. I'll still be with my team. I'll still sit on the bench. I'm just not going to suit up and play. What are your thoughts, V?
Well, let me qualify what I'm going to say by saying this first. Damian Lillard is one of my favorite athletes, not just basketball players, but athletes, because I feel like he is someone who stays connected to reality, right? Right. No matter what his salary says, and then also his just competitive nature and instincts. And this commentary is, with that said, this is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard him say. And, you know, everyone has the right to have like a brain freeze moment or something like that. Again, it's about what he said and what that signals, right? He didn't say, if I don't have a chance or my team doesn't have a chance to make the playoffs, we're not playing because of the health risks that are involved with playing with this virus going around. And maybe, you know, again, he might come back and say that his comments were taken out of context, and he did say that. So I want to give him the benefit of the doubt because these are surprising comments. But if this is what he said, it's one of the most asinine things he said for a variety of reasons, right? One, he gets paid to play. There's 16 games left. He makes about $400,000 a game. If the Portland Trailblazers weren't making the playoffs, he didn't sit out any other time, right? It's only 16 games in the season. And if you really are a competitor and the competitor we know him to be, then get your team in position to make the playoffs. It's not the NBA's fault that you've played 66 games and you're in the 9th or 10th spot. That's completely on you and your team. Play better, do better, win.
Right.
You know?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm conflicted here. When I first heard this, I was conflicted because I was like, I understand. Again, I think that it's reasonable to give somebody the implication, whether they say it or not, that they're assuming some type of risk is associated with playing. Right. I think he shouldn't have to say that for us to assume that. Right. But I do think, though, that there's a difference between saying, from a competitive standpoint, there's a difference between saying, look, I don't care if we're first seed, I don't care if we're 6th seed, I don't care if we're 15th seed. I don't think it's safe enough to play. Yeah. And if they try to return us back too fast before I think it's safe enough to play, I'm not playing. I respect that completely, like as a stance, right? Even if people are mad at you and, you know, they say, well, what did the health official say? And you're like, I don't care what the health official said. I disagree. I respect that. The problem is that it makes him seem like this isn't a dude that I would want on my team if I was on the playground, right? Because it's like, what do you mean? So if you don't have an opportunity to make it based on your record that you earned, right? Your 29 wins, whatever you guys have over 60-something games, you're just not going to play. But if you do have an opportunity, then you're going to play. All of a sudden, the risk is it's a lot safer now. It's a lot more
exactly.
work. Like that's not, I don't feel like that's, to me, that's corny, right?
I mean, think about it. We know this. Whenever we play pickup basketball and you're playing, whether it's 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 5-on-5, and you're playing make it, take it, and you're down 7-0, there's a difference between those guys who are down 7-0 and keep playing hard and those guys that don't.
Yeah.
What Dame's commentary essentially is saying, oh well, we're not gonna be able to win, so why should I try?
That's what bothers me about it, because first of all, we're very pro player on this show. I'm absolutely pro player. Yeah. I love players when they stand up for their rights. I love when they go against the grain. Love it, love it, love it. The thing about this one though, it just seems like you're not accepting kind of responsibility for the position that you're in. That's your position that you're in. It's one thing if this thing started and it was unfair, or it had only been 5 games played in the season and you didn't have a chance, but you had over 60-something games.
I mean, Atlanta, all the teams that aren't even in playoff contention, they have to play all 82 games, right? Like they still have to go through the season.
The question to me is, and I agree that there's relative risk that you're willing to accept based on all potential outcomes, right? So it's almost every analysis you make is risk reward. Whether you decide to go to the grocery store or not, or have your groceries delivered, those are all risk reward analyses that we're making now in this coronavirus period.
Yeah.
But where things become different is when it becomes when it sounds selfish, when you're a part of something bigger. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's kind of, that's the thing that a little upset about.
And I think we both agree on this point and qualify it this way. This is completely out of character from what we know and have observed about Damian Lillard in his entire basketball career. So that's why I'm willing to give him some benefit of the doubt. But it doesn't take away the fact that it was a dumb comment, right?
Yeah, to me, I don't like it. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, I'm typically pro player. I'll typically try to find the angles to defend the player. This one I don't like. Either take a real stance, which is, look, it's not safe to play, so I'm not playing, or don't say anything at all. And if, there's another point that one of our boys made, we talked to Kelsey and our boy Will about this too, and one of the points that Kelsey made was that he thinks that this is just a leverage play, that this is much ado about nothing. He's just basically saying this because he's trying to use his leverage to get the NBA to acquiesce and create some type of system that's more favorable to him. So he's like, I don't even know why you guys are even, that's clearly what he's doing, and so I don't want to overreact. I'm not like,
have a lot of power during this time. This isn't a normal time to just say whatever. Right. So that's kind of, I understand that line of thinking, but it's like, okay, there's a way to do it. And he did it in the most ineffective way possible. So
I agree. That's perfect. That's a perfect way of saying it. So, we'll see how that plays out. Let's move on. Well, we're talking NBA coronavirus. Quick shout out. Patrick Ewing actually contracted the coronavirus, and he's recovering, said it's very, very serious, and hope people take it seriously. So definitely prayers up for him. Let's talk some more basketball real quick there. So, obviously The Last Dance, we've been watching The Last Dance, it ended last week. But, it's still pretty much the talk of NBA circles. And it's actually spawned a couple different conversations that I wanted to talk to you about. One of them was, there's audio that surfaced from back in the day where Jordan said that he wouldn't play on the Dream Team if Isaiah was playing. And they actually have that audio, and it was released through a podcast this week. And that contradicts somewhat kind of what Jordan said, that he kind of, had no influence on the decision whether or not Isaiah played. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously this is 30-something years ago. Maybe you can just say, who the fuck cares? But
I mean, it is who cares, right?
Yeah,
because Isaiah Thomas isn't somebody that's worth our sympathy, generally speaking, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing what we know about what he's done in his career and post-career and how he treated people. But with that said, he did directly say that he's not playing. And the issue that I have with these things is they always focus in on that part. But Jordan continued in that same conversation and said, Rod Thorne said Charles Barkley said he wouldn't play with Isaiah either. So it does support Jordan's claim that he wasn't the only guy that was uncomfortable. It wasn't just about me. There were plenty of guys on that team that did not want to play with Isaiah, including Magic Johnson, right?
But I do think that it's clear though that like if Mike told Rod Thorne he's not playing if Isaiah's playing, I mean, if he said that in an interview, I'm sure he said that behind the scenes, and for sure that affected the decision. Like you don't need to play coy, Mike. Like we got it. You know what I mean? Like you didn't like
You say I exercised my power.
Right.
They had it. I gave them a choice and they chose me.
Exactly.
Right?
Now, I would have been more comfortable if he had said that, because we all know that is what happened. Now, did he go there and aggressively say, "Hey, you don't put Isaiah on or whatever because I'm Michael Jordan"? He basically said, "Look, if you have him, I'm not playing." And that's enough. You're Michael freaking Jordan at that point. Yeah. You know, that was enough. Then one other thing that kind of has started to surface a little bit is kind of a LeBron versus Kobe kind of GOAT conversation, or second GOAT or third GOAT or whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of how you evaluate them. And there's somebody, I can't remember who it was now, who came out and basically said that Kobe is still above LeBron. Mm-hmm. And when I hear people say that, I can understand why they say it. I guess it kind of just depends on what it is that you're measuring. What are your thoughts kind of on the Kobe versus LeBron, I guess, kind of, place in history?
I think what a lot of people are getting kind of blurred in that conversation is this isn't a conversation about the most talented player to play the game, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you're measuring GOAT, there are many other factors that need to be considered, including how you fare in the championship round. It's universal amongst all sports. And I think the fact is that Kobe has a three-peat. LeBron has never even won. I don't think they've ever even won back-to-back championships.
They didn't in Miami.
And didn't sustain that dominance in his career. Now, and again, I qualify this by saying when you're making these distinctions, you're splitting hairs, right? Mm-hmm. Kobe's still above on my list because even after Shaq left, he was able to be the lead dog on that team and win 2 more championships, right?
So that's why, and that's why I think the conversation it's almost talking across each other all the time, because a lot of times it's not framed. So when you say, is it the most talented? Who's the top 5 most talented players I've ever seen? Yeah, that's a different question, like you said, than who is the GOAT on the court, accolades GOAT, right?
Yeah,
and not just accolades, but also like everything, eye test, accolades, clutch, moments, all those type of things that you use. I think those conversations are different. So I mean, from a skill set standpoint, you look at Kobe, he's basically like 99% of Jordan, right? Yeah. So your argument about who's most talented a lot of times just comes down to which style of basketball did you like more. You know what I mean? It's like you said.
LeBron has the most eclectic skill set. I like to use that word we've ever seen, right? Yeah. And I hate saying this because it's almost like I feel like real hardcore LeBron fans can't handle you putting him anywhere but number 1, right? Mm-hmm. And then they want to be able to qualify certain things to support their argument, right? They can qualify and say and excuse away the fact that LeBron is 2-6 in 3-6 in championships. But that's the same case. Then Jordan fans should be able to just as strongly say, well, Jordan's 6-0. It's not like,
but the thing is, the thing that bothers me about LeBron fans and Jordan fans, essentially, is that they want to qualify certain things, but then they also want to determine the terms about what things matter. So, like, for example, for Jordan's perspective, people could say, well, LeBron never got swept, or he never lost in the first round. What can you include? But you say, oh, no, only the finals matter. People are like, well, no, actually, other things do matter besides the finals. So it's the argument is circular. That's why I never really have it.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, and you said this before. First of all, to me, Michael Jordan's the GOAT, right? I have no problem saying that, right? Personally, I like LeBron more, right? As a person I'd rather hang out with or be affiliated with, it'd be LeBron.
A better human being.
Yeah, and I also think that if the people who say he's the most talented player they've ever seen, I don't argue with those people at all. So for me, I'm very comfortable kind of in where I am with this thing. I don't feel
and there's certain things like, how adamant I am about Jordan being the GOAT, and feel like it's a useless conversation. But with that being said, if somebody comes and presents the argument that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the GOAT, though, I'll say I respectfully disagree. I understand fully. Like in terms of resume, his resume is shitting on everyone's, right? Three NCAA championships, 3 NCAA MVPs, 6 rings, 6 MVPs. Like he's got it all.
There are a lot of people that are
all-time scoring leader,
and they're not listening to that. Yeah, there are a lot of people that tell you that, and they're not listening to the whole Jordan thing. So, but the other thing about LeBron too, last thing I'll say on him is that he still has some time.
He has time. If he gets 2 more rings,
if he goes, like, for example, let's say they play this season, and he beats Houston and beats Kawhi, and then goes and beats Giannis. That's a very, very impressive ring. I mean, he starts moving up the list. Very. I mean, that's a serious discussion. And then if he goes and gets a 5th one, there definitely will probably get even closer to 50-50.
I think the question when you start splitting hairs down the line, right, is he going to be is he still the best player on his team, right?
Yeah.
Because I think in every one of those in the Kobe scenario, when he won 2 more rings post Shaq, he was the best player on the team.
Right. But then some people will tell you that Shaq was the 3-time MVP, though. 3-time, not 3 out of 3.
I mean, that's a lot of people they marginalize those 3 rings for Kobe, right?
Yeah.
And if he had not come back and won those 2 rings,
it would have been
Kobe wouldn't even be in the conversation.
And that's kind of like with the conversation situation Durant finds himself in now, right?
Yeah.
Nobody even count. I mean, people seriously, no one's counting that ring. Yeah, you got it. It's cool, whatever. But that's not. We don't measure that ring the way we measure other rings. You know?
And so it's going to come down to. I mean, and LeBron, I still do think is if Anthony Davis dominates the playoffs and they're winning with LeBron almost as Robin, then I think the GOAT conversation specifically, right, will still have some holes in it. But if he goes through and dominates this year and gets the MVP in the finals, he's right there. Yeah. He jumps over Kobe for me. Right?
Yeah. So from that, it's funny. I'm not like, I'm fiending for sports just like the next person. But what I don't want is, first of all, people to be unsafe. And then second of all, for sports have to start and then stop. And then, I don't want that kind of disruption. But to the extent that we can get back and playing safely, I think that is one of the things I'm looking most forward to is how's the NBA season going to end? Because I mean, there's some teams, man, and that's a dogfight. Whoever wins that finals, especially whoever comes out the West, but even the East, that's going to be some real basketball.
I mean, and let's be honest, like LeBron and Kawhi getting this much time to rest their hurt bodies,
right?
It's going to be a problem for people in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely. So let's move on. Talk some NFL stuff, man. So the NFL has some changes in the Rooney Rule. And the Rooney Rule, for people who don't know, is essentially a rule that was adopted by the NFL a while ago that basically said that, when you have a job opening, you have to interview at least one minority candidate for head coach. And the reason why they did that is because, minority head coaches have historically been kind of X'd out and still are being X'd out from these positions. And they realized there's been a lot of backlash. So they realized they had to make some adjustments. So I'm going to read you a couple of the rules to expand the Rooney Rule, and then we'll talk about it. The first one is it requires at least 2 external minority candidates to be interviewed for the head coach position, and at least 1 minority candidate for offensive, defensive, and special teams coordinator positions. Second one is it requires at least 1 external minority candidate to be interviewed for a senior football operations or general manager position. And then the third one is it requires club and league office to include minorities and or female applicants for senior level positions, and they name a bunch of senior level positions. Those are the proposals that have gone through as part of the expansion. There was another discussion about potentially having something that could affect your draft status, I think, or something like that. Anyway, so what are your thoughts on kind of this new development and what effect it could have?
I mean, they can keep changing these rules and adding different layers to try to force the hand of owners.
Mm-hmm.
But, we know enough about this is that the majority of players in the NFL are African American.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a firm believer in equal representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't have say that these guys are good enough to represent the majority of players, right?
Mm-hmm.
But aren't good enough or I just won't ever buy that there aren't enough qualified candidates then to take any of these positions, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's clearly been a historical issue with the NFL that this is an old boys club. There's only one minority owner in the entire NFL.
Yeah.
So until the NFL really takes this seriously, like the NBA has and other leagues have, in saying, okay, there are consequences for you not hiring Eric Bieniemy, who's qualified and has the resume to have a head coaching job, and he's not even given a serious shot at any job. That clearly speaks to something deeper here in terms of collusion, in terms of old mentalities, in terms of thinking that I don't know if the league can mandate or change, because at the end of the day, I still feel like NFL owners are comfortable. Caucasian NFL owners are most comfortable hiring a Caucasian to be a head coach or to be their GM.
Let me tell you something that's interesting about this conversation. And I was actually listening to Louis Riddick talk about it, and he said something that was striking. He said the irony in this whole thing is that these NFL owners are the ones that are voting on this. So they're basically saying, okay, hey, fellow guys, since we can't on our own decide to be inclusive, well, let's put it in a rule.
Yeah.
To police ourselves. Like, what type of, it's crazy when you think about that. It's generally not how things happen. So you think that you're either, like you said, old school enough, racist enough, ignorant enough, not caring enough, whatever it is, to feel like you have to put it in an actual rule to govern yourself. It's crazy. So to me, what it means, and this is what a lot of things in society mean, and we'll transition after this into something that, kind of relates to this conversation. But a lot of things in society is that people are going to have to police themselves and who they are internally, and the issues that they have, things that they've been taught, things that are subconsciously in their head that make them make decisions before any rule or any change or any guideline is going to make people do it. So it's cool. Last thing I'll say on this is it's cool because it forces more people to get in the door. And the more people that get in the door, the more chances of somebody getting hired or getting an experience or, meeting someone or whatever that, this could help. But overall, whether it's going to have a serious impact, I don't think so.
I think that's generally when change is going to come on the issue of race is when the majority start to stop accepting willful and unwillful ignorance, right? Mm-hmm. And actually do the work of educating themselves on what minorities are dealing with and actually understand the issues beyond just, oh man, we need to hire a black or brown face because that's what the rule says we have to do. That's not what this is about. This is about giving people who deserve the same shot that these other people are getting.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think, and a lot of this comes down to just old institutions, like you said, and old networks, and people hire and work with who they know a lot of times as well. And sometimes it's that, to be honest. So this is forcing them to expand who it is that they know, who it is that's in their network, forcing them to kind of go outside of their general comfort zones and make some changes. And I think it's better than nothing. And that's honestly, that's all I can say.
You just made a great point. It's like sometimes you see it. It's like these coaches who can't win get other jobs easily, right?
Unbelievable.
Like after what happened in Philadelphia, Chip Kelly just went and got another job in San Francisco. Based on what?
Mm-hmm. It's crazy. And so that's kind of how this thing goes. So hopefully, it's something that, I guess the positive news, which is what people always kind of want to hear, is that, there is some progress being made. And at least these discussions are being had, and maybe some of them are fruitless, but even if 1 or 5% of them are fruitful, then that's better than 0.
Yep.
And that kind of makes transitions into some pop culture, kind of, I don't want to call it pop culture, but some like real news that's happening across the country. The one was the one in New York with the lady Amy Cooper, who essentially was choking her dog out while she was threatening to call, or actually didn't threaten. She actually called the 911 and told the police that this black man who was asking her to put her dog on the leash per the rules of the park and the state. She was saying that he was threatening her, and she started shrieking and acting like she was being under attack, and she wasn't. And that video has gone viral, and she's now lost her dog. And she's also at least been put on leave for her job, and very likely stands to lose her job. And she came out with some bullshit apology, saying she's not racist, and this isn't what happened. It didn't happen all whatever. So, but it brought up another, beyond obviously what you think about that, which obviously I'll give you a chance to talk about. There was another kind of issue that was going viral where people are it's called doxing, I guess, which is basically outing people's names and their information. And there are some people that, like, even though what she did was reprehensible, doxing isn't cool, basically. What are your thoughts kind of on the situation, and then kind of the whole doxing conversation?
Well, this situation is so layered, and I think it's a great example of what really needs to be discussed, right? Mm-hmm. When it comes to race relations. One of the biggest issues is that I think, whether knowingly or unknowingly, right? I have plenty of white friends and associates in my network who are great people, mm-hmm. right? But there is these two concepts of white privilege and entitlement that kind of need to be addressed, right? This understanding that I am superior just by virtue of my color, and I can do harm to you just because I'm white and you're black. Mm-hmm. It's something that's deeply rooted in this country, right? Mm-hmm. And it's sad. It's not supposed to be the case. It is a reality, right? But the fact that this woman essentially threatened this man with police, mm-hmm. who could have come, arrested, or killed him. We know mm-hmm. that could have happened in this scenario, mm-hmm. Because she was breaking the rules. Mm-hmm. And she could not handle the fact that a minority was telling her to follow rules that are set for the park. Mm-hmm. That's the only explanation for this. It enraged her so deeply, mm-hmm. and her sense of privilege and entitlement so deeply,
that she was willing to get him killed.
Yeah,
and I think the other sad part about this is that she knew that by calling the police and by saying that basically she's a white lady that's being threatened by African American and she fears for her safety, she knew what that meant. She knew that could have resulted in something very dangerous for that man. And she knew specifically because he was African American. She said it twice.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, that's the thing that a lot of times in these videos you don't get. A lot of times in these videos you won't get her saying, oh, he's an African-American man. He'll just be African-American. And then you have to draw your own conclusions. And then people will say, oh, it's not a racist. Why do you think it's a race thing? And people will say it's clearly a race thing. And then you have that debate. This time we don't have that debate.
Yeah. Right? And what's ironic and sad about this situation is that I think that the guy is like a Harvard graduate, and he's like crushing her in all departments, right?
Yeah.
But that just goes to show you. And then the sad thing, that's the ironic thing. The sad thing is that this person was in a very, very high position in an investment company. Mm-hmm. And this is someone who holds these beliefs internally, that is making mm-hmm. decisions consistently, mm-hmm. and also managing people's money that are minorities, right?
And managing people within the company. Because I think she had a fairly good position. Yeah, that's the other thing too. It's just sad to know that there are a lot of people like this lurking around society undetected, right?
And this is why, like, whenever people get upset about, when I hear the statement, that people are always complaining, why are people always outraged? It's like, when you see stuff like this, you have to understand why the rage has to come out the way that it does. as loudly as it does and as consistently as it does, because clearly things aren't changing.
Well, and that was kind of the Martin Luther King approach, right? Which was kind of just, let's continue highlighting over and over and over and over and over again through video, through non-violence, through boycotts, whatever. Let's show over and over and over again, because a lot of people won't believe it until they see certain things, know. And so that's kind of what this video does. So we'll see what ends up happening to her. And I guess the last question on this is about the doxing thing. I guess what's your opinion on that? Is that generally, and I guess kind of in this situation?
I think, again, that when people don't feel like justice is being served properly, people try to figure out some way to capture some power and control over a situation. People are sick and tired of people committing acts like this and facing no consequences. So at the least, they feel like if we expose them, we can at least shame them. Right. And I'd love to see and know what the consequences for this lady would have been if she wasn't outed. Right? And how drastically different they would have been. So again, I think, for every reaction, there's going to be a reaction. And so it's straight.
Well, and I think also, to me, I guess I would say it depends on the degree, right? And I guess who are we to judge, so to speak? But fuck it, that's what we do. I think it depends on the degree of how egregious I think what you did was, right? If this was just like, some two people got in a fight and, I don't know, whatever, they got in a fight, whatever, that's not necessarily something. But when it's something like that's this egregious and this dangerous, and it actually brings up issues that are very explosive within society, right? And it creates conversation. And also, like you said, this is somebody who's actually managing people and dealing with people, minorities, the people that she's scared of, so to speak. I think, sorry, you shouldn't have fucking done it, because
there are consequences for your actions.
Not to mention, and this is another thing, not to mention you choking the hell out of that dog, like you broke the law. You broke the law, number one, by not putting them on a leash, and everybody knows why they have those leash rules there. You then threatened a guy because he was black. You called the police and were trying to have him assaulted. You're strangling a dog, and people aren't going to out you. No, sorry, that's that's not.
I have a legal question on this. Is there, in situations like this where people are obviously and clearly falsely accused, is there any legal recourse for them?
Yeah, there is. I mean, each state is different, but they do actually have, I guess what's called filing a false report. That's one thing. There are a couple other potential things.
Because you can't just call 911 and there are consequences for calling 911.
No, you can't. So they can charge you for filing a false report. I think it's a misdemeanor. And then there are a few other charges that are probably harder to make stick that you could file. But yeah, there actually are legal consequences. A lot of times it doesn't amount to much, though. And that's the other thing that I think makes people so enraged, is that, and also in other situations of being falsely accused is, if you're falsely accused and you're convicted, you can go to jail in a lot of some of these instances for life. Yeah. But you can falsely accuse someone and it just be a complete lie, and we find out you falsely accused and there's no real punishment for you. Like, where's the justice in that? Yeah. So, that is definitely something that under the law needs to change. And then I want to move move to the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis. The video that's going around on social media, a black man who was, had the officer essentially kill him, having his knee on his neck. A guy saying he couldn't breathe. As the officers were looking around, not really helping the situation. Community was around. I, again, have not watched the video. So everything I'm telling you is from things that I've either read or heard. I just don't have the stomach to kind of watch these videos anymore. I don't know, man. It's just like,
I'm tired of hearing this. There's just a bad apple, right? Conversation. Because I think if we're going to have a real conversation, we need to have a real conversation and get to the heart of these issues, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the major issues that I have is how they choose and qualify people who become police officers, right? very often these people are people who were assholes in high school, don't have a lot else going on for them. And this is not all of them, right?
Of course not. Yeah, I mean, obviously,
I don't want to say that, but there is a problem in the people who choose to become police officers. There's actually an issue within that needs to be.
I think it starts before that, and I think, first of all, like you said, it's important to say this because people go crazy if you don't. Obviously, not everybody does this type of thing. There are a lot of cops who've helped people and done great things, and those stories are important as well. But the problem, I think, with these type of situations is a couple of things. First of all, if you're talking about, so there are a number of issues. One is like, there's a race issue that's always underlying, right? And that's something that's a societal problem as far as this country is concerned, right? It's not reduced to any profession. And then you have kind of an abuse of power thing, which could relate to that as well, but doesn't always have to, right? Which is a separate kind of issue, right? And lack of training or not good enough training or abuse of power, and then the code of people, I'm not speaking out against it. Even if I think what he did was wrong, I'm not going to stop it. I'm not speaking out against it. And how dangerous that can actually be. And that's part of what it seems like manifested in Minneapolis is just a dangerous cocktail of all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just there's no justification for it. I hear people say, even if the guy was breaking the law or did something wrong, that's not how you restrain somebody. It's not how you have handcuffs. You have the back of a police car.
Mm-hmm. That move is actually against the law, I believe.
The to protect and serve, right? Mm-hmm. You are breaking your oath by handling someone in that way, and just almost a carelessness. Like he didn't give a, like you could just see he didn't give a damn, like about.
Yeah, that's why I can't watch it, man. Because
and then to see the other cop, and then that's the other thing is it's like, okay, if you're a good cop, then do something about it. That that's wrong.
Yeah.
But you're just,
and that's what I hope eventually starts to happen, right? In these conversations, is it's not just, okay, we want justice for the perpetrator, so to speak, right? That's obviously, we want that, but we also want people to start speaking up, man. People in position.
We have deep-rooted issues in our police department in America, including race, including abuse of power, including corruption, criminality. Mm-hmm. There are a ton of issues that aren't properly being managed or handled. I'm tired of hearing the same line. We love our cops. We all love our cops. We all know that without the police, that there will be a lot more crime, right? With all that said, it doesn't mean that there aren't issues that constantly need to be worked on to improve how they execute their jobs and to make sure situations like this aren't happening. And I don't feel like that's happening properly.
Well, I think that, like, it's part of it too is people get really emotional about certain topics and then they black out and they don't hear anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in a lot of conversations, hot button conversations in this country, especially now. So anyway, for this particular situation, obviously we hope that, he gets justice, George Floyd and his family, RIP. And we'll obviously be following that and see what happens. I'm sure it could be, if it doesn't get handled in a certain way, you may see, unrest in Minneapolis. Yeah. So we'll pay attention to that. Let's move on to some more like pop culture stuff, some business stuff. The coronavirus obviously has affected a lot of different people and businesses. We talk about it a lot in the sports context and the music context, but Hertz, car rental, and they own, I think, a couple other car rentals. They're filing for bankruptcy, and a couple of things with that. One is that they're saying, so this is a tip for people who are looking for a car. They're going to be selling a lot of their cars at discounts right now, so now's a good time to go check that out. But it says, I think they've been around for over 100 years, you know what I mean? And so it just really highlights kind of some of the impact of this virus.
Yeah, I think people are getting lost in this. Oh, the stock market's still going up though. But even when you break down the stock market, there are a lot of American companies that rely on consumer consumption that are really struggling right now. People are highlighting the general market, but it's important that we keep these businesses who are being impacted by essentially acts of God, right? That we do more to help them. And the truth is that bankruptcy sometimes can be a great thing for a business to go through, right? But we know.
And why is that? Why is that? Explain to me why that is. Because I think a lot of times when you hear bankruptcy, it's like, oh my God, they don't have any money, they have nothing. But that's not necessarily what it means in the business context.
When you have an unhealthy patient, right? You can either just put a Band-Aid on them and tell them, hopefully it gets better, or you can force them to really address whatever the real health concern or issue is in a real way. And I think that what bankruptcy does is it forces you to look in the mirror and dig deeper and address your issues and not just cover them. So, many major American companies have gone through bankruptcy. Our airlines go through bankruptcies all the time. Our big car companies go through them. So when you hear bankruptcy, it has this real negative connotation to it. Obviously, nobody wants to go bankrupt, right? But in this scenario, it might be something considering they have some creditor issues and stuff like that. The best way to address all the issues and come out better on the other side. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens with that. And then there've been like a lot of evictions resuming in a lot of different cities across the country. I think for a second, a lot of kind of landlords were more understanding about people not paying, and people weren't really evicting. And I think there might have even been some anti-eviction guidelines that were enacted in different states. But now the evictions are back. People are like, they want their money, and that's an issue that we're going to be dealing with too.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to issues like this, one of the things that I'm very interested in seeing is what's going to happen when this federal aid kind of falls off and people aren't getting these weekly unemployment checks and pandemic relief checks, and we really have to deal with the weight of 30%, 25%, 20% unemployment in this country, right? And I understand both sides of this. I've been a landlord and my landlord, and understand their side of this as well. But I think, again, we have to, as a society, figure out what is fair, right?
Yeah.
And if evictions mean, I've always, in my situations, I've always found that there are reasonable solutions to major problems, right? Whether that's, okay, well, we understand you're going through economic hardship, so you're going to pay an extra $200 a month until you're caught up in your rent, right?
Right.
We have to crack down on landlords who are not being sympathetic to the reality of what human beings are facing, right? Putting a family out on the street that was paying their rent and doing everything right, but that situation hit, that could create a major problem for our country, right? So we just have to
well, I think one thing that I think has to happen when the government decides that they're going to shut you down and tell you, listen, you can't work, right? Then they have to do they have to do everything, right? You got to start making, arrangements with landlords. Put together, make sure people have enough money to get through this type of thing. Make sure the benefits are coming quickly enough. Make sure there are opportunities for people to work, like, and get hazard pay if they go out and decide to be an essential worker. You got to, create, like Mark Cuban said, create a whole bunch of jobs. There are a ton of jobs that the government could create.
That's obviously what happened in the Great Depression and the New Deal. And that actually benefited because it created a lot of the infrastructure we use today, right? And particularly in America, we have a serious infrastructure problem. Our bridges are going bad. There is more than enough work that needs to be done. We're falling behind the rest of the world in terms of infrastructure. So that's kind of what the issue here is. It's one thing to give people money, but put people to work. There are a lot of people out here who want work, and there is work that our country needs. Don't just write checks that don't help and end July 31st, right? What happened after July 31st?
Yeah.
These people all out on their own? No. Have a plan and process. Say, okay, we have to create more jobs than we've ever needed to create. Let's start somewhere. Let's not just sit around and do
and the other thing too is, I think, you know, back to the like kind of paying the landlord situation, is like a lot of landlords, you know, they don't have excess money to just keep that mortgage and and money that they owe the banks. That's another reason you have to get the banks on board as well. Like this, if a landlord's like, listen, I'm just a small business guy that bought this property. If I don't get this money, I can't pay the bank. What do you think they're going to do?
There is a system in place already that the government has in place for subsidized housing, right? Mm-hmm. Why can't they create some sort of pandemic unemployment public housing initiative where you can qualify for up to 3 to 6 months while you're getting back on your feet, right? Like we already have the system in place, and it's not.
And that's why it's frustrating just watching this thing play out politically as it has, right? Because at the end of the day, most of us need the same things, right? So, I mean, obviously, you know, there's some people that don't, but most of us kind of are going through all the same issues, right? So it's just frustrating how this thing has been handled from beginning to end. And that's and just from beginning to now, like this thing has not been handled well. And, you know, a lot of the suffering that has happened did not actually have to happen if this thing had been handled well. I'm not even just talking about the death. I'm talking about the way the people who are living are suffering right now throughout the country.
Yeah. I mean, I said, even from the death standpoint, I read an article on NPR today saying if they had just started social distancing a week earlier, about 36,000 of these deaths would not have happened. Right.
It's crazy. And the thing is that, so then imagine what 2 weeks earlier would have done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's that. And then also the decisions that, you know, just not any real uniformity.
I mean, what does opening up the economy mean? Like opening up what does that actually mean? How are you going? What is the plan to take the 20-some% of our population that has lost their jobs, that it's willing to work and earn their living and pay their bills? How are we going to get these people jobs? Because getting them jobs is actually in the best interest of the country, because then they become taxpayers, you know, and then they pay bills, they consume. 70% of our economy is consumption.
Well, a lot of the employers that open up now are not going to need probably as many people as they needed before.
No, they're not. Same thing that happened in 08.
Yeah. Yeah. Or people are going to have to be working from home. And even then they might be cutting down. So, you know, a lot of times the first thing to go is payroll, you know, it's workforce. High paid employees a lot of times are first to go. So anyway, we'll see how this thing pans out. I wanted to talk some music before we get out of here. Couple things. One is let's start with the versus battles, right? So Beanie Man and Bounty Killer, they had one this weekend in Jamaica. The police came. I mean, like you couldn't have written it better.
What do you expect from reggae artists, right? They're eccentric as eccentric gets. So.
I loved it, man. It brought me back. You know, you and I were actually big reggae fans in college, and I think my brother and my sister used to bring us back mixed reggae CDs back then at that time. Yeah. So we always had like the first step in Columbus on reggae. So I think it was dope, man. It was good.
It was good. I honestly, the eccentricity, and then like just the fact that there were like 100 people there, and it wasn't like the traditional versus screen to screen.
Right.
It threw me off, but I mean, but I'm glad that they included reggae in the versus battle, and you know the numbers show just how powerful this music culture is throughout the world. So.
Absolutely. And then 112 and Jagged Edge had theirs. What did you think about it?
Musically, I mean, these two groups, I mean, I don't know who all the talent around them are, the writers are, but man, talk about talent and music and songs,
right?
And groups and like, just hit
hard to see that
hit after hit.
It's hard to see that thing today, man. I think society's become too individualized, where people aren't willing to sacrifice anymore, and sometimes for good reason, but sometimes just not. You know, people aren't really willing to sacrifice anymore to be in a group. Everybody wants to be solo dolo, and get all the accolades by themselves. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we're gonna. Well, you know, we had so many groups back then. I mean, Silk, H-Town, you know,
Yeah.
not Jodeci, you know, I mean, literally mad groups. New
Yeah,
Edition, like,
and even like the content of the music was so much different. They talked about things, right?
Right.
It wasn't just about the melody. Like you had to have a real ability to sing
yeah,
and
right.
have lyrics and
you felt like those guys were in love for real.
all
man.
the
Like,
different all the different things like that. And that, like you said about being in a group, it's not just one guy singing and then coming up with some background and ad libs. You got harmonies, all kinds of crazy harmonies going on
right.
in the background that you might not even hear. Like I was hearing things when I was listening to these songs that I had never heard before.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Yep. And that's what, again, you know, we talk about these a lot, and it's just it exposes a couple things. First of all, we grew up in a great era of music, which you and I talked about before, and then also just you know, how important music is to society, you know, and how important it is to, you know, to think that you can put something like this on Instagram and have 500,000 people watching it, or 1 million people watching it at once. I mean, that just shows you, just to watch people on Instagram Live, you have 500,000 people. That's crazy. So.
And this goes back to why it isn't today, right? We like to blame the artists and we like to blame the cookie cutter model, but the reality is that once music started getting pirated by companies like Napster, the amount of money that these record labels were investing, even in managing and developing artists and groups, declined accordingly. That's how economies and capitalism work, right? So we tend to blame the people and the artists, but they're just responding to the current environment that exists, the record labels have created, which is we don't want to spend any money developing talent. We want something that's easy to put out.
That's easy to put out. And speaking of the record labels, Instagram's actually cracking down on DJs who are playing live songs that are longer than 90 seconds. So a lot of DJs have been having like sets. I think DJ D Nice was the first one, and a lot of DJs have been having like different sets or like club this, you know, every night. But they're cracking down. They're basically saying that it violates their agreements with record labels and publishers for them to play songs longer than 90 seconds. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you know,
this is a tale as old as time, right? When the suits and lawyers get in the way of the culture, right? The truth is music doesn't grow without DJs playing your music. Every artist who's ever made it knows that getting someone like D Nice to play your record makes your record bigger, right? And every DJ, that's what they do for artists. They expose your music to the masses. And it's not like they're making a bunch of money on this. I know there's probably some sponsor agreements and stuff like that. Figure out a better solution than to say we're just going to litigate and we're going to come after you if you play songs longer than 90 seconds. There has to be more discretion here in how
here's the problem.
These things are done.
Here's the problem. The problem is that the way artists get paid and the way music ownership gets paid is very tricky, right? It's not your traditional exchange where it's like, okay, here you give me your orange and I give you 50 cents. You know what I mean? It's kind of like all these different channels, and one of them is actually performance rights, which is like ASCAP and BMI. So every time your song gets played on the radio or in a stadium or something like that, a movie, you essentially get paid for it. I think, you know, and I'll do some more research into this, but it seems to me initially that it's basically they haven't figured out how the money works yet, right? So if a DJ is going to come and essentially be able to enhance his or her brand on the back of music that we produce and that we own, and we don't see anything off of that, people who own the product aren't going to let that happen, right? So I think, but what it sounds like to me is that, I mean, that's a fairly interesting compromise. 90 seconds, I'm surprised it's even that long. The DJ doesn't even need to play a song more than 90 seconds if they're doing a DJ set. So that's plenty of time. I mean, especially nowadays, some of these songs are two minutes. You know what I mean? So, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's just a like you said, how people get compensated is very, very convoluted and tricky. And I think there could be some work done to simplify that and make it easier for everyone. But then the lawyers don't get paid, right?
Right. But the last thing is, and artists do, you're right though, the artists, if you're talking to the artists artist is like, nah, man, let them play my shit,
Yeah.
man. Let them play my shit. Like, you know, but it's the artists a lot of times don't even own the music. So
Mhm.
it's just a lot.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. The record labels, like we've seen in the versus battles, we've seen it in every time somebody plays these records, their streams go up. So you're making money, and that's why I think sometimes people get so caught up sometimes in putting everything under a microscope and making sure they capture every penny.
Yeah,
that you're losing out on the big picture here, which is every artist that's been on a versus battle playing their music for free on Instagram has seen their streams go up exponentially.
Yeah, and there are very few things, and there are very few things in the world that could make that happen. You know what I mean? You could spend millions of dollars and not get those results. So, yeah, I agree with you there. So we'll see, and I think it's going to continue to be an issue. And because this thing is continuing to get monetized now, I saw Ciroc was a sponsor this weekend, so now the brands are starting to get involved.
I don't know about that. Here's the thing. I was like, I hope Diddy's sending them their publishing checks the way that they're promoting Ciroc for him.
Right. Well, yeah. And you know what? It's crazy because there are a lot of just different interests here. There's the artists, there's the DJs, there's the music publishers, there's the producers. Obviously there's the record owners, there's sponsors, and then there's the fan, right? And so I think Instagram has a vested interest in not shutting this thing down and making sure that this can happen because there's too many people that are interested. But it's also got to be it's business too, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to set bad precedents. So last thing on news and notes, Six Flags is reopening their park on June 5th. Disney is also having plans to reopen pretty soon. I think they had them and a couple other places had to submit their plans for reopening in Florida to the governor and to get approval. It seems like it's going to be heavy social distancing, lines, masks, which could be crazy, especially if you're talking about Florida, 100 degrees weather. Temperature checks, distance, only a certain number of people allowed on a ride at each time, wipe downs after every ride, all that type of stuff. What are your thoughts on it?
I mean,
would you go? Does that sound like something you would want to do?
Me personally, probably not. but I guess I'm moving forward a little bit on my thinking on a lot of these things in the sense that if you are willing to take on the inherent risk that comes with some of these activities, right? At a certain point, the reality is we don't need any of these things. Like they're not necessities or essential businesses. The amusement park isn't an essential business. But as Americans, we've gotten accustomed to having entertainment, having leisure activity, having sports. So to take that away from us specifically has potential consequences that I don't fully understand from a psychological standpoint and potential issues standpoint. So I'm not going to be as hardcore in saying this is dumb. Why the hell are they doing this? Would I personally do this tomorrow? No, but
yeah. The thing for me, I think is like, I agree with you. I think on a certain point in time, people have to evaluate the risk and make a calculation, right? Just like they do, especially as things are open up. Yeah. And just like you do with anything else, right? And I'm not to say that this is just like anything else, but my point is it's a risk, just like driving is a risk, right? And you have to, at some point, you're going to have to make that analysis. Now, the problem that I'm having, though, is that we're not even sure if we know the right information, because I've seen articles that say these numbers are inflated, and I've seen articles that say these numbers are way under and deflated, and that there's governments and health systems suppressing information or adding information, and so we may not even know what this data we have right now may not be accurate. Not to mention, you haven't tested everyone, so you can't really know what the numbers really are. I mean, it's like, just
so many conflicts of interest that we have, right? Because these amusement parks and restaurants and stuff, they employ people that need the money to pay their bills too, right? So shutting down Disney World means tens of thousands of people don't have jobs anymore.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then there's the economic side of it, which is Disney is a publicly traded company who has to answer to their shareholders on why they're not making money, right? There's that. Then there's the health side of this. Like you said, the issue is that we don't know. I don't feel like we have the scientists are saying that we don't know yet, right?
Yeah, right.
We're not even sure how to treat this thing reliably yet. So I definitely hear you on that side of it. And I do think that this is just a very, very dramatic and troubling situation, because there's so many conflicts of interest. And it's hard to know what the right thing to do is.
It is. And like you said, you know, at a certain point, you kind of just going to have to make your own analysis, you know, and not look to anybody to protect you, right? You're just going to have to literally make your own analysis day to day. And that analysis, like we said earlier in the show, can change week to week. It can change day to day, what that means for you, you know, as the information develops and so on and so forth. And right now, as a lot of places are reopening, I imagine within the next 3 weeks to a month or so, you know, assuming that there's data is being reported accurately, which is a big assumption, but assuming data is being reported accurately, we'll have a better sense of this thing, whether or not a second wave is likely. So, you know, I'm going to be paying close attention to that.
The biggest thing that I've seen, and you saw the video, I think you posted something about the Ozarks.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that what we're seeing is that social distancing guidelines aren't being enforced properly is concerning, right? Open up, take precautions. But what I'm seeing is just at these bars and clubs, just a lot of free-for-alls and no rules being followed. And
that's frustrating. That's frustrating to me, because those are a lot of the same people who would tell you in other instances, well, why don't you just follow the rules? You know, well, if you follow the rules, then this wouldn't have happened, you know, and then a lot of those same people are not following the guidelines, and then if you're not following the dress code at any nightclub and you have any melanin in your skin, you have a problem, right? So. Well, and that's the thing, and that's the thing too, which is crazy, is that, you know, you have people who these guidelines were like, the whole idea of reopening was under certain guidelines, right? It wasn't like, okay, yeah, we're safe now from the virus, so let's just go and everybody just be around each other and hundreds of people. No, it was like, we're reopening, but in all caps, we're reopening with these guidelines because this is what is going to keep us safe. But what I've also come to see is that people are making their own analysis. Like we said before, they think some people think this is bullshit. Some people say, I don't care anymore. Some people say, if I get it, I'll fight it. Some people say, you know,
some people are just too young to know any better. You know,
there's that too. So, you know, at this point, like I said, I'm done with the fights on Twitter. I'm done with, you know, all that stuff. People are going to do what they're going to do. And so at this point, you just have to make your own decisions and pray. If you're a praying person, you pray and you hope that, you know, this thing, we all want this thing to be gone. You know what I mean? That's the thing. There's nobody that's like, oh, yes, let's have this.
Every culture has, you know, its issues and flaws. And one of ours is that as Americans, we have a lot of freedoms and we don't like to be inconvenienced. And so there's a tug of war going on right now between our general sentiment and belief that we have the right to do what we want to do, right? Versus the idea that, hey, we all need to make certain changes to protect ourselves and protect each other. And I think that that's reasonable, a reasonable expectation for us all to have.
Absolutely. All right, that's all we have for news and notes. You're listening to the Pilot Boys Podcast, episode 30.
Love the Pilot Boys Podcast? Support us on Patreon. Supporters can pledge as little as $1, and we have some cool perks on there. Check out www.patreon.com/Pilot Boys Podcast. Show us some love today.
That's all we have for today's show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Don't forget, sharing is caring. Subscribe to the Pilot Boys Podcast on Apple, Spotify, Patreon, and YouTube. And please follow us on social media at Pilot Boys Pod on Twitter and at Pilot Boys Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And follow the host on Twitter. I am at Mechadon Music, and V is at The Swan. And don't forget to grab some Pilot Boys wristbands at shop.pilotboys.com.
Always remember, be you. You is fly.
Pilot Boys out!
Pilot Boys, we get on up.